Well, afternoon, everyone. Thanks for attending today. So today I'm going to talk to you about some drone research we've been doing out of CSUMB, and in particular our NOAA Cooperative Center, the Center for Coastal and Marine Ecosystems. And let's get this started. There we go. So when we think about traditional coastal research, survey approaches, we've had a lot historically as marine ecologists, standard tool sets available to us, quadrats, transect surveys, scuba diving. And these are approaches that really did lay the foundation for a lot of what we know in marine ecology. They were very valuable research days, particularly in the early days of intertidal research, which had a lot of the foundational work around marine ecology. But as our questions in marine ecology are becoming more complex, we're starting to recognize a lot of the limitations in some of these traditional approaches, and these tend to center about both the spatial and the temporal coverages that they can offer you. If you look at something like a quadrat that's at the very top there, it does a really good job of capturing data at that half-meter scale. But if I want to get an understanding of the intertidal communities in an entire region, it's not a very effective way of doing that. Even something like scuba diving, which also gives us really nice coverage underwater, again, you're limited by the amount of time you can stay underwater. And so we are starting to recognize there are certain limitations in these approaches. And so we need to start to adopt new ways of getting information out of the coastal environment. And about 7 years ago, this paper came out in Science. It was titled The 21st Century Ocean Scientist by Kintich. And what it was is really a summary of a National Academy of Science report that focused on how to develop the next generation oceanography fleet in the US. One of the challenges we were running into was the sheer cost of the UNOLS fleet in the US. It was just the needs of the UNOLS fleet were really outpacing the budget of NSF at this point. And what came out of this was that we need to start looking at automation and robotics as a way to replace, right, a lot of the services that we had historically gotten out of the UNOLS fleet in this case. And so where we're at today is really thinking about in this age of robotics, like how are we going to start to do this? And so in intertidal research, we're having to think about this as well. And so one of the things that we have to face is that while historically we have used a lot of manual methods like quadrats and meter tapes, we also have to be ready to integrate these automated approaches like drones. So what I'm going to talk about in the rest of the presentation today are really about NOAA-supported drone operations at CSUMB. And these tend to focus on two main areas on our campus, both drone-based research and drone-based training, and this can include the training of graduate students as well as in-class training. And so why have we gone to drone-based coastal research on our campus? Well, one is it provides extended spatial and temporal coverage. Right? Drones can cover a lot of land in a real short amount of time. I look at my own history of having done traditional intertidal surveys. A single site, could take us 3 or 4 hours to do, usually with a team of 4 or 5 people. Nowadays, the drone can do the same amount of work in about 5 to 6 minutes. The surveys are pretty easily replicated in space. These things are pretty accurate in terms of how they replicate their surveys, and so they can replicate a survey, plus or minus, 5 to 10 centimeters in space from the air, and so they're pretty accurate. And then the big one nowadays, when you start thinking about budgets and sort of budgetary limitations, you don't need a lot of people and time out in the field to do this. In fact, you can do a whole survey with just one person operating the drone at this point. And so drones are offering a lot of advantages, right, for the world of intertidal research. And at least here on our campus, we've invested pretty heavily in a sequence of drones here that help us serve different mission needs within our program. Here are a couple. These are pretty standard drones here. There are a couple of quad rotors. On the left there, that's the DJI MAVIC 2 Pro. Pretty standard, pretty new quad rotor there. We have 3 available to our center at the moment. It comes standard with a 20 megapixel camera and 4K video. We use it for our low altitude habitat surveys in intertidal, so anywhere from 2 meters to 10 meters above the surface of the intertidal. We also use these Phantom 4 Pros here. This is kind of the standard classic drone here. It comes with a 20 megapixel camera, 4K video. We use this for mid-altitude surveys. So we normally will pair this up with the MAVIC. So while the MAVIC's doing very low altitude surveys, we autonomously will fly the DJI Phantom above that so it can capture the larger area within which our intertidal transects are captured here. And so we do this pretty quickly. We can normally knock out a 30-meter stretch of shoreline in an intertidal system in the span of about 10 to 15 minutes at a resolution of about 0.2 to 0.5 centimeters. We also have some more specialized drones that are housed within the center. These are a couple of our recent additions. The DJI MATRICE 210. It's a heavy payload quad rotor drone, so it can carry multiple pieces of instrumentation at the same time. And so, for example, we can simultaneously outfit it with a DSLR RGB camera and a multispectral camera at the same time. We also recently purchased a fixed wing vertical takeoff and landing drone. This is actually a pretty unique drone in that the prompts on it are actually pointed up at takeoff, so it takes off like a helicopter. They rotate forward, and that allows it to fly like a plane. And so it can cover a lot of area in a pretty short amount of time. This one has a 42 megapixel camera. You can also swap in a multi-spec camera. And Patty and Pietro is actually going to talk a lot more about this a little bit later in his talk today. We've also invested pretty heavily in Pix4D mapping and photogrammetry software. What this allows us to do, it allows us to actually plan missions, autonomous missions for our drones. And so what you're looking at on the left there, it's actually a grid that we can set up out at, this is one of our sites out on Catalina Island. So that grid, we can set the intensity or the density of the sample surveys as well as the elevation above the surface there. That particular mission profile can then get stored in the cloud, and every time we launch a drone at that site, we just upload that mission profile and it goes back to that exact grid in space, plus or minus 5 to 10 meters in space. Takes the photos, and then it will upload it to a cloud server where it automatically renders the photos into a really long transect survey as you're looking at right there. This particular example here at Catalina, this is about a 30-meter stretch of shoreline done autonomously. The drone did it on its own in 5 to 6 minutes at a resolution of 0.4 centimeters. And this is the type of stuff you can get out of it. We can ultimately take all of this, and using structure from motion-based photogrammetry, we can stitch all of these photos together to create really high resolution three-dimensional models of coastal environment. And so what you're looking at here, you're looking at a model from Point Pinos that we took a couple of years back, I think, at this point here. But again, this is a fairly big area that we're surveying in a small amount of time. But what's really nice about it is you can put this into a GIS package, extract data out of it just as you would in the field, and then analyzing it using something like R, JMP, or Python. So just a brief example of something that we're doing here. This is some work we've been doing out at Catalina Island, looking at the marine protected area there that's at Wrigley. And in particular, what we've been looking at, it's looking at the effectiveness of that MPA relative to populations of spiny lobsters out there. Now, one of the things that people have tended to forget about lobsters in Southern California, they're actually intertidal foragers. Carlos Robles worked this out in the late 80s, early 90s, where he documented them as being a keystone predator in rocky intertidal systems. And so you're actually seeing one of his time-lapse series here. This is from the late 80s, where you're seeing the tide come in panels A and B. Slack high tide, panel C, you can see all the lobsters are foraging their tidal. And then as they go back out, you see the lobsters go back out. But as part of this, what we've needed to do is we actually have to go back each year and assess how this foraging habitat that they utilize every summer is changing over time. And so historically, we would do that with transects and quadrats. And it takes a lot of time. And I'm not a 22-year-old guy anymore. And so doing this type of work kind of takes its toll on you after a while. And so that the drones have actually been a nice addition. And so we've actually implemented drone-based surveying the intertidal habitats around Catalina Island relative to this project here. And we're really using it as a way to assess over time how rapidly, right, these systems may or may not be changing, right, relative to their use by lobsters out here. And you're actually seeing some photos of us out here last January doing some of the survey work. And so it used to take us actually, in this case, about 4 to 5 days to survey by hand. We actually knock out in the span of 90 minutes now with the drones. And this is just one example from Catalina. This is in Fisherman's Cove, for those of you who have been there before. As you're looking out to the water from the USC lab, this is one of the sites that's on the far left there. This one, we actually maybe need to take the boat out there. We simply autonomously launched the drone from the helipad there at Wrigley. It went over to this area here, surveyed it in 6 minutes at a resolution of 0.25 centimeters. And this was flown at a height of about, I think it was about 12 meters. Above the surface there. But you can see, we get a lot of resolution.
Right.
Now we're able Someone?
It's fine, continue.
Okay, no worries. And what we're seeing here is you can actually then extract data out of here and then analyze it as you would traditional quadrat and transect survey data. But what we've been doing here, we've been autonomously or automatically classifying this. So what we do is we put this in something like ArcMap and classify the habitat, but that can actually take a bit of time. And so with Taylor Eddy, a graduate student in my lab, has worked out her methods for automatically classifying this. And what she's doing is she's using the image classification tool in ArcMap to go ahead and auto-classify this. And what she's doing here, she's using the property that different items in here reflect light back at different wavelengths, and you can use that as a way to classify different types of habitat, in this case here. So things like black mussels will reflect black light back at one wavelength, coral and algae at another wavelength. She can train the software to aggregate those pixel categories into habitat types, and from that, she can get a % coverage off of this. And so what might have taken an hour to hand classify in something like ArcMap, now with the software, once you get to trained, it can knock these out in 30 second to 1 minute clips. In this case, with an accuracy rate of about 90 to 92%. And so people ask, like, why are we so worried about this, classifying this? It's because we need to try to capture change over time. This is actually Catalina Island in the late 80s. When I show this to people, folks tend to think that, oh, maybe this is like the Olympic coast, you know, of Washington. This is actually Catalina Island, Southern California, in the late 80s. And so this is actually this is one of the areas that we work at. This is what it looks like now. And so we're seeing this traditional foraging habitat rapidly disappearing in Southern California. And so one of the comments that I get back whenever I present is, oh, Corey, that's a Channel Island. It's really different than the mainland. We don't need to worry about this. Say, yes, this is true now, but really what you're looking at on Catalina Island, it's remnants of what used to be on the mainland. This is actually Orange County, just down the road from Disneyland, 1973. When I show this to people without reference, they think I'm showing them a picture of Tatoosh Island. Nope, this is Southern California, what it used to look like. And it's really that just the methods we had used historically just weren't able to capture this type of data. We didn't have that type of resolution. We did fortunately have people in the past, you know, this is actually a picture from Dale Sweetnam, 73, where he actually went out and did photo quadrats of this. And so we actually have nice photo data. We can go back in time and assess what the actual baselines used to look like for this habitat. But going forward, this is what we're hoping to use the drones for, to establish these really long-term photographic baseline records of habitat along the California coast. And looking forward, we're actually— 1 minute left. What's that?
About 1 minute left.
Okay. So moving forward, we are going to build out sort of a larger ocean. We're looking at ways to build out larger ocean observing systems here on the California coastline as part of a new Coastlines and People RCN that was just funded with our group and UC Santa Barbara. And we're also looking to build out more training programs. We were just awarded this grant from the National Ocean Service to actually train students within our NOAA Center in next-gen monitoring technologies, which will involve things like drones. So just to summarize here, it's really that, you know, drones in this case, they provide a relatively low-cost approach for doing coastal research. We can really start to extend the spatial and temporal scales over which we do this type of work, and we can actually introduce a lot of types of different audiences to coastal research through this approach. And so just to wrap up here, I just want to make sure I acknowledge all of our funders and the folks who've supported our work. And if we have time, I'm happy to answer a question or two.